Welcome back to Insight, our discussion of the terror threat within Russia and how it's being exported around the world. My guests in the studio are Domitila Sagramozo, who is a lecturer in security and development, and a former Kremlin advisor, Alexander Nekrasov. Domitila, I put the thought there. You're a young person, let's say it's a young man for the sake of argument. You're growing up in one of those Central Asian states. You have precious no money in your family. The draw to go off and try and find a living of some kind in one of the big Russian cities is huge, correct?
Yes, there's a very high number, especially from Kyrgyzstan and from Tajikistan. They have very big numbers of young individuals and families moving to the big cities of Russia, to Moscow in particular. And there is a possibility that they might get in touch with groups that are trying to recruit them to go and fight.
They're vulnerable at that point, you would say?
One could argue they're vulnerable. They have jobs, they have menial jobs, but their living conditions are not ideal. Many live sometimes in containers. It's a very harsh reality for them. And so one couldn't exclude the possibility that this vulnerability makes them potential targets for recruits, many of which are not necessarily based in the area, but they have connections, with diasporas of Chechens, for example, in Turkey or in other parts of the Middle East, and are trying to bring these groups together. It's important to remember that there are remnants of these jihadist groups which were quite active in Central Asia during the late 1990s, early 2000s, before the Americans actually went into Afghanistan. And the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, which has changed names a few times, is one of the best examples. They have a presence now, importantly, in Syria, for example.
And are these groups who have sworn allegiance to the ISIS-Daesh movement as well?
Some of them have sworn allegiance to Daesh. Others have joined the al-Nusra group. It's very interesting because some of these groups in Central Asia had strong connections with the Taliban and al-Qaeda. And so very recently, because some of them in Afghanistan, they joined ISIS, there was a very strong attack on them by the Taliban. So it seems like many now are leaving Daesh aside and they're allying themselves with the al-Nusra group, which is quite strong in some parts of Syria.
So, Alexander, is it wrong to apply the old epithet of it's the economy stupid? If there was greater economic prosperity in all these countries, whether it's the Central Asian ones or the satellite parts of Russia, if some of the wealth were able to spread out there and give people better life chances, would that not improve things?
Well, I don't think so, because Russia has a long history of terrorism. And in the 19th century, political terrorism was a problem, a big problem in Russia. And would you believe it, that most of the terrorists were from middle classes? They were not poor people. They were lured into this world of
They were
terrorism.
ideologues. They were fighting for ideas, were
they thought it was a romantic something. It was political. It was the problem with Western governments, Russian government, is that we have to not politicize terrorism. We have to tell young people, this is criminal. This is a crime. You're becoming a criminal. You're not a political. You're not a martyr. This has nothing to do with religion. Unfortunately, this sort of propaganda does not come because for some unknown reason, even up to now, most governments accept terrorists as political. This is a huge mistake. The moment you show that these people are gangsters, killers, they're in it for the money. By the way, Daesh, a lot of them are in it for the money. Nobody talks about it publicly, but we should talk about it because some of these commanders are millionaires of Daesh. They're millionaires. So the point is this: we have to change the attitude to terrorism. We have to show it's criminal. Then young people will have less desire to be associated with these people.
But if people have very little, then ideas is all they have left, and an ideology or a dream is all they're fighting for, right?
I think ideologies are very powerful. It's not necessarily only a matter of economics, but certainly the socioeconomic situation and the political situation creates a particular environment where these ideas can prosper. So I think that there is a combination of all these various elements of a sense of disenfranchisement, a very powerful ideology which has a very strong attraction among many of these young individuals. individuals. They may find a sense of purpose. So I think that we cannot isolate all these elements. They are all together, coming together to create this sort of very negative combination and enticing some of these young individuals to go to Syria to fight, and to fight also in the sort of European theater, which also includes Russia. I think many European states and Russia face similar challenges of individuals that are not properly integrated in societies. In Europe, a lot of the jihadis and people involved in terrorist attacks are homegrown. They're not necessarily coming from Syria. And so there is a very serious problem, which is not only economic, it also involves participation in society and how we integrate them, and also how we curb this very powerful ideology with a counter-narrative. I think that that is also fundamental, to come up with a counter-narrative that is attractive to these young individuals so they're not enticed.
Who do we rely on to form the counter-narrative?
I think we should rely very much on Muslim clerics, on Muslim individuals that can have a strong say in societies. Here in the United Kingdom, for example, Sufi leaders have been trying to come with a counter-narrative to counter a lot of the Salafi jihadis. Because if you think about it, a lot of their arguments are always, often based on very wrong assumptions, even within the Quran. And also, many of these fighters, they're not very literate. So, you know, as long as we find something attractive where they can find a sense of meaning in their lives, I think that can be part of the answer.
And Alexander, do you think the Syria thing, it really is, the Syria conflict, which still drags on, is the real catalyst that sort of keeps this going? Because although the numbers, as we referred earlier, of people piling in to join Daesh in the north of that country, in northern Iraq and so on, have shrunk, the conflict is still alive and being fought today as we speak, isn't it?
Yeah, but there were many catalysts. You know, we went back to Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a catalyst, Libya, Iraq. So Syria is one part of the problem. Yemen is another problem. So we can go choose around as much as we want, where the center of it is, and so on. There are problems which have come with technology. Until governments force online companies to track down and stop these, hateful websites or these recruiters on websites, we can't do anything. Unfortunately, all these huge companies do whatever they want. The governments are asking them to help. They are trying to do, obviously, something. They cannot do anything, but it's not enough.
So Russia suffers from that problem of propaganda spread through the internet,
of course,
as much as any other nation.
That is the biggest problem at the moment, because governments don't really know how do you combine a freedom of speech and yet very tight censorship of the online community. And that is where I see the most biggest challenge to stopping terrorism recruitment.
Alexander Nekrasov, Domitila Sagramosa, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
We end with our Insight Bite, a little something that we feel you should know, from one world power to another. So let's bring you some pictures from China. Beijing has launched its second aircraft carrier after nearly 4 years of construction. Unlike the first carrier, which came from Russia, this one was built by the Chinese from scratch. The country's military experts say it will act as China's Great Wall of the Sea. The launch comes as Washington and Seoul conduct joint military exercises off the Korean peninsula in the wake of Pyongyang's recent missile tests. And that's all from me for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.